Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at Palestine by Joe Sacco. This is the 2001 complete collection of all 9 issues of the Palestine comic that Fantagraphics published between 1993 and 1995. And this is a pretty remarkable graphic novel. I probably don't have to tell you that. I mean, Palestine is taught in colleges. I think it's up to its like 25th printing, if not more. And it's amazing work. It's so good. Basically, it's famous for introducing comic book journalism as a genre. Sure, people here and there did little short stories, but this is a very sustained, long-form journalistic piece. In 1991 to 1992, Joe Sacco went to Palestine with a notebook and a camera, just like a reporter, and lived amongst the people in Palestine. And, took notes and made this graphic novel when he got back to America. This was during the first Intifada, which lasted from the late 80s to the early 90s. It was pretty much winding down when Joe Sacco was there, but still lots of conflict going on. Obviously, Joe Sacco does the cover, he does all the art in this. Very hefty graphic novel, as you can see. It's quite a work. And let's crack this open. Published by Fantagraphics. And we have an introduction by journalist Edward Said. There's a pretty lengthy introduction, very informative, very interesting. Edward Said is I believe he's of Palestinian descent, but I know for sure that a lot of his reporting is about the Middle East. He's kind of an expert. So to get him to do the introduction is pretty great. We have an author's foreword, and as you can see, very brief. Just Joe Sacco writing this little piece about how he wrote this, created this graphic novel. Chapter 1. Man, look at this. Joe Sacco. Nobody draws like him. This is, we start off in Cairo. So he's on his way to Palestine. And just look at this amazing chaos going on. Just with all the various angles and viewpoints. I'm sure perspective is all fucked in this. If you were an artist, you'd be like, the perspective's off. But that's the point. You could just feel the chaos and the noise of the traffic. It's just crazy street scenes, people piling onto buses. And I love this too. This is a very Joe Sacco thing. Making all the captions at various angles. That kind of makes them flow. Almost like you had a deck of playing cards and you just threw them onto the ground, It's a really interesting technique because, something usually this kind of different draws attention to itself, takes you out of the story. But I didn't find it at all. Last night I reread this for the first time in a long time. And I didn't stop once and be like, these captions are interesting. It really does just flow, and you forget how weird they are. But look at this. Look at the word balloons here, completely at this weird angle. So he's hanging out in Cairo with these 2 Muslims. One of them is heartsick because he fell in love with some woman from Prague. And his friend is just laughing at him, just completely amused by his sorrow. And I guess she went back to her husband. So it's this totally ridiculous infatuation. But when the topic of Palestine and Israel comes up, this guy stops laughing. And look at him. I would smash Israel. So we're going to see this throughout the book. It's like everyone in all the Palestinians obviously have something to say. They're very fiery about this topic, as you can imagine. And a lot of emphatic declarations like this. God, I love his cartooning. Such amazing faces. Like, they're crazy. Look at the schnoz on this guy. Nobody has a nose that big. Nobody ever has had a nose that big. But it works. When I'm reading this, I wasn't thinking, oh, that guy looks silly. I don't know. It's like a good caricaturist. He can exaggerate, insanely exaggerate features. But it all just kind of ends up looking like, oh, this is a real guy. Like, it looks like someone I could meet. Look at the work he puts into here. It's just amazing. It gets way more intense, his illustration. It's kind of remarkable to see over the course of 2 years how his drawing improves. And pretty much by chapter 4, chapter 5, it's pretty insane. I mean, this is great to me anyway. But it gets even better. So it seems like this is a recurring thing in this graphic novel. He keeps meeting people, and they basically befriend him and they become his tour guide. Everyone in Palestine has a story to tell. They know people with stories to tell about the oppression of the Israeli soldiers and the settlers. So whenever he meets someone, they'll basically just be like, come with me. You got to talk to this old guy. He was kicked out in 48. On and on and on. They basically really want their story to be told because they know that Joe Sacco is a Western journalist. We have a little flashback to Amsterdam. I guess he had a crush on this girl, but he's so going off, he's like this young, fiery liberal. He's just ranting about Palestine and the Palestinians and how they've been wronged, and she's just bored. She's just like, oh, you're lame. Politics and lust don't mix, I don't think. So here's that guy we saw on the first page or the third page. I can't remember his name. So he's just showing him around, introducing him. This woman's son is in prison by the Israelis. This kid's father is in prison. Basically, it seems like the majority of men in Palestine are in prison or have served stints in prison. Once again, look at the wall here. He didn't have to draw it that crazily. He could have just drawn flat bricks. But this is some really classic old school cartooning chops he's showing off. Once again, look at this crazy angle. So now he's in Jerusalem. So we do get to hear the Israeli side of the story sometimes, but for the most part, it's a Palestinian story. That's why Joe Sacco went. Because, in America, we definitely get a more stilted view since we've always supported Israel. Pretty much no matter what they've done. The U.S. government has never once, stopped giving them aid. So there's this guy, David. He's an American Jew. And they're just having this conversation. It's like a friendly debate. Talking about the whole conflict. We see some history. Talking about, basically for a century, England was on the side of the Jews, basically gave him this land after World War II. And pretty soon, it was pretty apparent, especially when Israel became a state, that they could do anything they wanted to the Palestinians. And the English were kind of ruling over that area in a light capacity. They gave them the thumbs up. They didn't give a shit what the Jews did to the Palestinians. They were all for it. And of course, many Palestinians were displaced from their land. We see more old guys who remember 1948 actually getting kicked off their land. When I worked at a newsstand in Chicago, the guy who delivered our newspapers every morning, was his name Yusuf? I feel bad. I can't remember his name. But, he was a little boy in 1948, and he remembers getting kicked off his land, him and his family. And he said it was interesting, though. He said before 1948, the Jews and the Muslims just lived as neighbors. They played together. They went to school together. And then when Israel became a state, it was a different ball game. And it was basically the Jews are on top. We're the top dogs, and you Palestinians have to go. So we're still here in Jerusalem. We meet some kind of studly Israeli defense soldier. And all these American Jewish tourists are like in awe of him. They're just like, oh, look at you. But as you probably know, there's, Israelis themselves who don't like what's going on. They have peace demonstrations, just like the hippies, American hippies, protest what we're doing in Vietnam. And so these Israelis, they love Israel, but they don't want to be fucking with the Palestinians all the time. They figure maybe we could coexist. And obviously, all the Israelis he talks to, most of them, almost everyone he talks to is pretty sympathetic to the Palestinian plight. They're almost like very liberal, but they still want a strong Israel. And when it comes down to it, they're not going to like push too hard. They think it's a shame what's going on, what's happening to the Palestinians. But they also are just like, yeah, but we love Israel, which I get. I mean, the Jews were fucked with for thousands of years. I think it's great they have a homeland. But I don't think it's great how they've treated the Palestinians, obviously. It just seems like, couldn't they have just tried to live with them? I don't know. But it sounds like, not just from this graphic novel, I mean, I've read about Israel and Palestine a bunch. I mean, I'm no expert, but enough just being an American who reads magazines and stuff, newspapers. But it seems like, yeah, right from the get-go, they were just like, let's get rid of these guys. They didn't even seem to try to coexist. So now we're in the Valley of Kidron. And these two little Palestinian kids, they're basically very, they're very curious. They can tell he's a foreigner. And they kind of wheedle money out of him, almost bully him, because they show how good they are at throwing rocks. And they're basically like, give us 10 shekels. And Joe tries to make it less, and they're just like, 10. And Joe gets so pissed off. Joe's kind of a wimp. He storms off. And when he gets back to the market in the old city where all the Palestinians are, he's just like pissed off at all the Palestinians. He's like, they get me sick. They're big sad eyes. They're empty pockets. I want to kick them. So that's a very interesting thing of this graphic novel. It makes it way more entertaining. Joe Sacco definitely sometimes shows himself all the foibles and flaws. He shows his flaws a lot. Just like anyone. I mean, he's honest. Barely anyone probably is always thinking great noble thoughts. Sometimes they're thinking petty little shitty thoughts. They're cowardly or they're whatever. And Joe Sacco is all too ready to show some of his flaws. Look at this great drawing right here. So he gets a taxi to Nablus. He's going to be in Nablus a bunch. He basically just travels around from city to city. Sometimes he goes back to the same city, and but then a lot of nights he spends in Jerusalem, and Israel is just like pretty much like America. It's affluent. There's discos. You could totally forget that just right across these walls, people are living in like third world squalor. I love this guy. He's so proud of the milk from his cow. Doesn't speak much English. He's just going, my cow, my cow. And he insists that Joe take the milk. And just like, sorry, I don't really like milk. It's an interesting thing about the Palestinian people. They, at least the way Joe Sacco depicts them, they just seem so generous. And they just want to they have nothing. Most of these people are pretty poor. They're refugees. But whenever they want to give him fruit and stuff. Like, please take this, please. I grew these myself. You have to take them. People showing off the injuries they've gotten from the soldiers. I like this. This is a running theme in the book. Speaking of Joe showing his flaws, even though there's all this tragedy around him, he totally admits, he's like, no, I need more. I want gunshot injuries, broken bones, amputees. I need the the sexy stuff that's going to make my graphic novel sell more. Because he wants his graphic novel to be dramatic. He doesn't want to go to Palestine and just see a few people with a few scratches, you know. So he even he's very honest about how he wants to see the gnarly stuff, which is kind of weird. I love this, how these guys, because this is another thing, like I said, the Palestinians just seem to whenever they meet Joe, they just want to these guys are yanking him through this hospital. They're it looks like they're just, it's against his will. They're just come, you must see these people who were injured by the Israelis. And so he has to go to this ward and meet all these Palestinians who were wounded. I mean, he recognizes that it's good for his book. He meets this cute little girl. And so he talks about how, let's say the Israeli forces shoot a Palestinian. The Palestinian will be rushed to the hospital, but then the soldiers will show up. They'll track the ambulance, and they'll just bust into the surgery room. This guy could be on his deathbed, getting very precise surgery. They don't care. The doctors will be like, get the hell out of here, it's a surgery. And sometimes they just beat up the doctors. They really seem to have no regard for the Palestinian people. They just treat them like just subhumans. And basically, you could be lying on a gurney, half dead, and they'll be interrogating you, even trying to rough you up a little. And the nurses and doctors have to fight them and say, you can't do this to a patient. This guy is hurt, But they have all the power, so they don't have to listen. It's not like you could lodge a complaint. The Israeli forces wouldn't give a shit. So now we're in Hebron, and we see some of the settlers. So this is obviously a big part of the conflict. When the Palestinians get kicked out, for various reasons, as Joe Sacco tells us, or if you know anything about Israel, it's if you're Palestinian, it's almost impossible to get a building permit. So basically your house is illegal if you build a house, and they can bulldoze it anytime they want. And, it's all nice and legal. They're like, oh, this isn't we didn't give you a building permit. But they rarely give them out. So constantly these Palestinians who've lived on land forever, their houses, I guess, aren't kosher. Sorry, that's a bad choice of words. And then these settlers move in, and they're encouraged to move in. They get tax breaks because they don't want the Palestinians coming back. So and it seems like most of the settlers are European or American Jews, from first world countries. And they just walk around the streets with Uzis, kind of bullying Palestinians whenever they feel like it. And the Palestinians have no real recourse. I mean, every now and then, if a settler does something really egregious, they can call the army. And the army might, if it's really something bad, they might put him into custody. But 99% of the times, the case gets thrown out of court if a settler attacks a Palestinian. Of course, the converse is not the same way. And many Palestinians, without even evidence, are sent to jail. So he meets this old guy who says, give me 10 shekels, I'll be your tour guide. And he seems to know a lot about this cave of Machpelah, which is a very, almost like a biblical era tourist attraction. And these settlers just come up to this nice old guy, and they just start heckling him and making fun of Muhammad. And the guy yells back at him. And a soldier comes up and says, hey, guys, cut it out. Because, they just don't want trouble. But if push came to shove, they would definitely defend the settler. Well, probably. But they just don't want to have to intervene, if things escalate. Man, look at this face. That's crazy. That is kind of grotesque. But like I said, last night when I was reading this, I didn't stop to think, that face. He's this old guy. I just see this interesting old guy. But when you actually look at it, it's absurd. No human has ever looked like this. Unless they had I don't know, pinheadism or something. Macrocephalogy. So this chapter is called Remind Me. I love the street scene of all these kids. Some of them are really weird looking. Look at this kid. And this little guy, he looks like a full-grown man who got shrunk down. So Joe Sacco, he's not like the finest artist, It's just like, it's like Barry Windsor Smith. But I love his caricatures. And every face is differentiated. It really gives it a human quality. So this chapter is, as you can see, it's mostly prose. And I'm really glad he hand-lettered it. This would be tiresome if it was a typeset. And this is I assume he wanted to fit a lot of history and information into this chapter. So the beginning, he's talking about pretty much the whole history of Israel and their relationship to the Palestinians, showing how many of their great leaders and prime ministers, I don't know about great, sorry, but they're famous, historical figures, they just are, the things they say about the Palestinians, they don't mince words. It's not like they're hiding their intentions. This one guy just said, Palestinian Arabs have only one role left: to flee. It's just like it's not like the American government who'll like lie about shit and just soft soap it. They just basically admit, like, we want the Palestinians fucking gone. And so this is another thing in the book. Joe Sacco is constantly being invited over to people's houses, just a bunch of young men all congregating, drinking tea. That's kind of a running gag of the graphic novel, is everyone in Palestine loves to drink tea constantly, all day long. Whenever you go to someone's house, they just offer you tea, glass after glass, and it's really sweet. So Joe Sacco, after a while, is just like, God, more tea. And look at the schnoz of that guy. That's amazing. So basically, in these meetings, they know Joe Sacco's a journalist. They just turn into, confessionals. Everyone tells their story. Being injured by a soldier, being put in prison, their brothers being put in prison. It just constantly happens. I love this. Look, there's Chuck Norris. So these Palestinian Muslims, they put in a videotape and they're watching Delta Force starring Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin. And the movie is about like these, action heroes basically fighting Palestinian terrorists. And they're the total bad guys. So Joe Sacco finds it odd that they're like watching this movie. And even though it's totally insulting and propaganda against Palestine. I love the way he draws this woman, Kulsum. She's an Egyptian singer. It seems like everywhere he goes, people are playing her music. She seems like, Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, and another big artist, the Beatles wrapped into one. She's just huge in the Middle East, it sounds like. So this isn't just history. This is also some of Joe Sacco's anecdotes. It's just, I love how lively this panel is. The body language of these guys. And of course, we just see a lot of the squalor of the Gaza Strip and, well, not necessarily the Gaza Strip, but all the other parts of where the Palestinians are forced to live. Chapter 3, 1,000 words. So I think he's back in Nablus now, and a spontaneous demonstration has erupted. Just these women have had enough. This happens every now and then. It's not planned by the PLO. Sometimes just something will happen, and just these moms and stuff are just angrily taken to the streets, yelling at Israelis in their cars, blocking traffic. They're just fed up. And, of course, the Israeli soldiers always show up, and they start knocking heads, throwing people in trucks, and arresting people. Once again, Joe Sacco's really good at showing chaos. All this, just all the art's shoved together. No panel borders. Now, Joe, this is going to be like a secondary character in the book. Saburo, a Japanese photographer. They're basically partnered up. And they figure they'll team up and help each other get stories. And then they meet this Palestinian photographer. Once again, look at this Panels and word balloons captions and word balloons just flowing down. I love it. And look at the cartooniness of their walk here. It's almost like a Keep on Truckin' by R. Crumb. It's so cartoony. Now we have the bucket. And here we learn about the olive trees. To a Palestinian, the olive trees were very important. They basically were part of their economic livelihood. The olive oil derived from the trees that they owned on their land. That's how they bought any extras. They grow food, but if they wanted to buy a sweater or wanted to buy light bulbs, it was basically the source of wealth for every family. They all owned their ancestral land. They had olive trees. And this is so cruel. The Israelis, when they kicked out a lot of the Palestinians, they would chop down their olive trees so they wouldn't return. Because if they left them up, they definitely would want to return. They'd be like, that's our wealth, But sometimes they do it just as punishment. This one person, I guess, maybe the son of this family, did something the Israelis didn't like, and they chopped down their olive trees. But then they might just chop down the neighbors too. And the neighbor will be like, I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you chopping down my trees? And they don't care. They're just like, stop crying. They obviously have they can just go into any Palestinian house and just start beating up people, the soldiers. They don't need warrants and stuff like that. And this old guy's talking about the olive trees. And he remembers, oh God, this is so mean. The Israelis basically made him cut down the trees himself. They brought him a chainsaw and they watched as he chopped down his own trees. And the whole time he was crying. He said it was like killing his own children. We get some more history. More of these quotes from these political figures throughout Israel's history. We're just basically saying, fuck you, Palestinians. We'll do whatever we want. You're not wanted. So now we hear of this is a story of what the settlers do. So, like I showed earlier, the settlers are just running around with Uzis because it's like the Wild West there. They're on this, encroaching on this land, and of course, all these Palestinians don't like it. So sometimes the settlers will get killed. The Palestinians will basically lynch a few people or kill them or blow them up. And then the Israelis, the settlers, will totally kill 5 more Palestinians for revenge. They don't care who they kill. It's basically like, you hurt us, we're going to hurt some of you. Even if you're innocent, we don't give a shit. So it's just a really bad situation as far as they just hate each other. And this guy's telling a story about how these settlers got all riled up one night. They said, get out of your houses, dogs, while they fired guns in the air. This is the weird thing, though. They bring their wives and their little kids are along for the ride, as if it's a family outing. These guys are basically committing acts of horrible terrorism. And they bring their little kids. I don't know, I guess it's like teaching their kids, this is what you got to do to Palestinians. This is our land. We got to teach them a lesson. And they threw rocks in this guy's window for an hour. Scared his sick mother. Practically, she was unconscious. She was so terrified. There's another thing I love about Joe Sacco, how he draws himself not so flatteringly. These poor refugees they're almost like Italians, Like when I went to Italy, my cousins would feed us insane, amazing food. I know they didn't eat like that every day. It's just something you do for a guest. But these guys are poor refugees, and every time Joe shows up, there's amazing little hors d'oeuvres and snacks, and a lot of people would probably be like, I shouldn't eat so much of this. It's like they could eat the leftovers tomorrow. They're not poor. I mean, they're not rich. But Joe just totally loves to indulge himself and be like, it's free food. It is delicious. And he makes a pig of himself. Joe Sacco talks to some of the Israeli soldiers, and of course they always have we just don't have the power to protect the Palestinians. We don't have enough manpower. But whenever the Israelis are attacked, they do seem to have the manpower to find the Palestinian who did it. More stories of people getting evicted from their basically ancestral homes, places their family has lived for generations. Just more horrible stories. Once again, in another room with other Palestinian men, all telling their stories. We find out that Saburo is a very sensitive soul. Even though he's there for the job, he's got to take photos of this conflict. He just almost can't take pictures sometimes of horrible things. He's just like, it's too heavy, man. It's too heavy. This one's called Brother for a Day. This seems to happen to Joe a lot in Palestine. He says, my new friend Khaled, whom I met for the first time 5 minutes ago, has a problem. So this guy just meets Joe, and instantly he's like calling him his brother, and he becomes his tour guide once again. And I just want to notice you to notice here. Look at the detail on these buildings, how beautifully they're drawn. This is just, you can just see Joe Sacco getting better and better very quickly. This is really impressive. But then look how, everyone's still cartoony. And it's almost like I guess they say that's the manga thing and the clear line thing, where if you have really well-drawn backgrounds, very illustrative backgrounds, and cartoony characters, it makes it pop more, and you can identify more with the character. That's a Scott McCloud Understanding Comics thing that he noticed, but that's how manga works. And like Tintin, even though people say I should say Tonton. And so Khaled is worried about getting picked up by the Israeli soldiers. Apparently they're on his tail. And they're walking around the city. Of course, Khaled's telling him more stories. And of course, Khaled takes him to another home where he can hear even more stories. Once again, he's making a pig of himself. Notice how nobody else is eating. It's just Joe. And to hear some more horrible stories. He tries to tell them, like, oh, not all the Israeli soldiers are bad. I met one who seemed pretty nice. And of course, they're totally unmoved by his story and are just like, yeah, he was nice to you. You're not Palestinian. Stupid American. Now he loses touch with Saburo. Saburo kind of goes AWOL. Once again, look at this beautifully drawn castle-looking thing. So now we got chapter 4. God, this could be like a John Severin war comic. Look at this. So this one's pretty much this chapter's all about prisons. And because obviously the Israelis are arresting so many Palestinians every day. They have to build these prisons on the fly, almost like 10 cities in the middle of the desert. And specifically, we're going to learn about Ansar 3, which was one of the first big prisons that they built out in the desert. This guy was served time there twice. He even named his daughter Ansar, because most of her childhood he was in Ansar. So now we have a flashback. Ansar and his two buddies, how they got arrested for something. They didn't even know what. And they don't have to tell you. And they get sent to first little municipal prisons where they're just treated horribly. It's really inhumane, the stories he tells. It's like, shit. Man, there's some just beautiful drawing here. Then they put him on these buses and take him out to Ansar 3. It was just built then, so it was new. But later on, this guy talks about how, he was freed finally, and then he had to go back. And he said he barely recognized it. It had grown so much. It had basically quadrupled in size. He talks about how the Palestinians in the prison, they basically organized themselves. A lot of these guys were like professors, doctors, lawyers, probably not terrorists, like these are like upper middle class guys. But the Israelis didn't care. They're just like, somebody said you had something to do with the PLO. So They organized the tea lines, but they even did like TED Talk type things. They'd have lectures on philosophy and Einstein, and they taught other prisoners, illiterate prisoners, how to read. And they all are organized into not, gangs. They weren't violent gangs, but basically by what faction of the PLO they were more in alliance with. There's Fateh, the Popular Front, the Democratic Front, the Communists, etc. These are all factions of the PLO. None of them agree exactly how to deal with Israel, but they definitely want to not, stop being kicked out of Palestine. So in Israel, everyone has to serve in the armed forces, men and women, for a certain amounts of time. So one of the prisoners tells the story about how his old boss got assigned to Ansar. His old boss from the civilian life. And this guy remembered him and would throw him packs of cigarettes. So obviously, these guys aren't total monsters, even though they do some bad things, these soldiers, but they're just people. But people who feel threatened, Now we have moderate pressure, which is about how they kind of change the laws about torture. Pretty much the Israelis can torture anyone they want. And they basically made it legal. They, in a way it was a good thing because it was saying, okay, you cannot torture people like real torture. You can't rip their fingernails out. But you can apply moderate physical pressure, which is very vague. So basically anything an Israeli soldier does, unless it's completely egregious, they can just say, it was moderate pressure. I was twisting his arm for an hour. I didn't think it would break. So Joe wants to find the nitty gritty. He actually is like, I want to know how they tortured you. What exactly did they do? This guy just pretends to punch Joe in the nuts, totally scares the shit out of him. But he stops before he does. And so this guy who got busted, he's talking about his whole experience with the system. Dude, I love this. He takes a break and has this one page, a Palestinian joke, and basically 3 secret agents, CIA, KGB, and 1 Shin Bet. Shin Bet are like the Israeli, CIA, or KGB. And they make a bet. Who can catch this rabbit the fastest in the forest? So the CIA guy runs in the forest, and he gets it in 10 minutes. KGB guy, they let the rabbit go. KGB guy runs in the forest, gets him 5 minutes. And then the Shin Bet guy says, that's nothing. Let him go again. I'll show you. And then he doesn't come back for an hour. So the CIA and KGB guy go looking for him. And they hear a sound. And they come to a clearing. And the Shin Bet guy is slapping this donkey saying, admit you're the rabbit. Admit you're the rabbit. That's a really funny joke, even though it's based on a very horrible truth. I like this one woman, this tough woman who just wouldn't give in. They just basically tortured her. I mean, not with knives and shit, but they made her sit for hours in this uncomfortable position. It's freezing. They deprived her of food and water, and they kept wanting her to sign a confession. That seems to be the trick. They just capture these Palestinians, torture them until they sign a confession. And then they can say, look, it's all wrapped up. The case solved. But a lot of these guys are totally innocent. They just want to get out of there. Another great crowd scene. This is a funeral. And everyone's wailing. This guy was killed by the Israeli Defense Forces. And Joe finds it weird that this is the one time the soldiers just watch and they don't break it up. I guess they just didn't feel like fighting that day. Man, he draws like everyone in this crowd. This Sacco's a hard-working cartoonist. Here's Moderate Pressure Part 2. More people are telling them about their experiences being tortured, showing off their wounds. This one's very straight for Joe Sacco, this chapter. Look, 6 panel pages. And not as much detail. So this guy's just basically repeating that woman's story, where they just constantly are like, torture him and then say, sign this confession. And this guy didn't back down either. He just put up with all of it. And he kept going to court. Because, you know, it's interesting. Israel is, people always say, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And I guess it is on paper, just like America is. But a lot of horrible things happen in America, even though technically we have these laws. And same thing with Israel. When it comes to our enemies, and when it comes to their enemies, all bets are off. Those democratic institutions don't matter anymore or work. And so every time, like, they can't get the confession. The guy is appointed a lawyer before this Israeli judge, and he keeps saying, Your Honor, please let my client go. He should be released. There's no evidence against him. Then 2 weeks later, the judge will say, oh, let's give them 2 more weeks to apply pressure to him. Maybe they'll get more evidence. 2 weeks pass, nothing, because he won't sign the confession. And the judge keeps saying, okay, 1 more week. Basically, that just happens 3 or 4 times. Even though the lawyer is telling him that, like, they're abusing him in there, the guards are treating him badly, he's getting health issues because of this, the judge doesn't give 2 shits. Finally, after all of this, maybe 3 or 4 times, because the guy's really getting injured. He's really, these little things they do to him, like make him sit in these weird chairs. He's getting chest pains. And it's freezing in there, too. And then, this is so different than the rest of the book. I didn't even notice this when I was reading it last night. That's the thing. Joe Sacco is such a good storyteller. It's not like it's all invisible. This is so different than his storytelling. You'd think I would have been like, oh, look, this is interesting. But no, I was just enthralled in the story. I was just turning the pages, just like, oh my God, what's going to happen to this guy? Once again, the judge, 7 more days. And finally, this one judge just says, yeah, release the guy. So he toughed it out. If he buckled under, he would have just been in jail forever. A confession signed under torture there is considered good evidence. Yeah, chapter 5. Ramallah. And Joe's visiting another city, looking for action. And he gets it. There's some gunshots, maybe an explosion. They hear some sounds, and then the soldiers show up. And these soldiers are very cagey and nervous. They're just totally whirling about, twirling every which way, pivoting, pirouetting. He says it's the West Bank Swan Lake. They're trying to keep their eye on everyone in the crowd at once. And then the protesters show up. A lot of teenage boys and girls. And a lot of the storekeepers shutter up their stores. They know there's going to be trouble. This isn't going to end well. This is basically during the Intifada. This just happened all the time. It's just like almost every day at its height, it would be like Palestinians clashing with the soldiers. So this is like this is the action that Joe wanted. This is the real shit. And we see all these youths blocking off roads so the soldiers can't get to them, throwing rocks. Throwing rocks and running, throwing some more rocks. And I love this, using this. Well, first of all, look how well drawn all these cars are. And then we'll see this Jeep like trying to get out of there. he meets this one woman, a Palestinian, who lived in Chicago for years. And she came back to Palestine because she was like, it's no place to raise kids, America. Probably because, the decadent, non-Muslim lifestyle. So she actually came back to this shit because that's how bad she thought America was. I guess if you live in the south side of Chicago, it's probably maybe worse than Palestine. I don't know. I'm speaking from, I don't know if they've changed the south side of Chicago. I lived there in Chicago in 91. So maybe it's different now, but it was pretty much nobody went down there. It was pretty scary. Shows another example of an Israeli soldier just bullying these poor old women who just want to get through this checkpoint so they can go to work. And the fact that I'm not telling you all these stories is obviously it's not that they're not interesting. They're all pretty fascinating. This is a huge graphic novel, and this would be a 2.5-hour video if I told you all the stories he collects. But to be honest, Joe even mentions this. They're all pretty much the same. It's just litany after litany of soldiers abusing them, taking their land, jailing them, and just feeling powerless. They're so outgunned. But they all just are so willing to talk to Joe. They really, that's all they have, I think. Is that's their ammunition, is the stories. And they want the world to know what's going on for real. Here's an example of so Joe hears a story about these settlers just going crazy, just coming into this town, throwing rocks at people, just shooting people, killing people randomly. People who weren't even attacking them, who were just trying to shutter their store. The settlers just shoot them with an Uzi. And then when you read the Jerusalem Post, which is the big newspaper in Israel, under this democracy, it's they make it seem like these Muslims started up trouble and these poor settlers defended themselves. I really love the way he did that, because he actually hears the story from the horse's mouth, and then you see how it's reported. So this is really interesting. So now he talks about women in this conflict. And obviously there's the elephant in the room is, they're Muslim. So they're second-class citizens. And, but they still are on this, they're a team. The men and women are all one Israel gone. And they want to be able to keep their homes, but they still have to deal with their husbands who just abuse them freely if they want to. And just women don't have any rights. So it's kind of interesting, fighting for a cause, and then what happens when you win? It's your condition will be worse, maybe, especially if Hamas takes over, because Hamas is around back here. I didn't mention them as one of the factions, but they're fundamentalist Muslim. So they would, the women wouldn't be doing very well. They might be happy that Israel's gone, but it won't be that great for them. So these women are telling Joe the way it is. And these are educated women, more secular. They're not wearing the head thing. So obviously they have a different opinion than most of the average Palestinian women. And so then he goes out amongst the average Palestinian women and he talks about the hijab. Because, it's a interesting thing. It's why do the women have to wear these? And a lot of the women he meets are just oh, I love wearing it. It shows my love of my religion and my country. I know I've heard this before, but how come the men don't have to wear any uncomfortable thing? Of course, is the argument, which some of the Palestinians tell Joe, is we're protecting our women from the lusts of men. But Joe doesn't just let that sit. He says, well, that sounds like the men's problem, not the woman's. So you see all these women wearing their hijab and they're all defending it. It's almost like they sound like they feel empowered by it. There's a negative example, though, of what can happen. This woman was shopping, and these more fundamentalist Muslims saw her without her head covering, and they started throwing rocks at her, really injuring her. And the guy driving with her said, "She's a Christian. What are you doing?" Because, obviously, a lot of Christians live here. Greek Orthodox. It's not just all Muslims. And then after all this talking to the women and sympathizing with them, we see Joe sitting with these two guys and basically laughing uproariously over this kind of sexist joke. I love this, how Joe does not make himself come off as a saint, He's just like, I'm kind of a jerk sometimes. Here's Refugee Land. Another beautiful drawing here. Just great illustration. Look at this ground here. I swear to God, this is like up there with R. Crumb as far as illustrating prowess. Just every little bit of mud and tire track. Really impressive stuff. So this is the Gaza Strip, which, that's the one everyone hears about. And it's quite the shithole. Love that logo, by the way. I wonder if he's trying to be like Harvey Kurtzman in Two Fisted Tales. Okay, guys, look at this shit. This is, not just R. Crumb. I think John Severin would be jealous of this. For me, that's very high praise. I fucking love John Severin. Look at this. Take your time. I hope the book's open enough. I don't want to crack the spine, but that is something else. So impressive. I mean, this would be great enough, but just even the receding buildings, he draws in all the detail. So fine. So much labor went into this. I'm curious how long this took him to draw. It's amazing. See how much better he is? Like in just a year or two. These only ran for 2 years. And you see such a difference. Even though he still draws these goony faces on some people. I love the way he draws kids. They make me laugh. Look at these funny faces. So now he's in this one town, and I guess they have a success story. They've made like a special education school for deaf children. And apparently more and more kids enroll every year. They're really making progress. It's one of the few bright spots. Awesome. More beautiful. I love the way he draws sky. Look at this, how it's kind of like kind of like Richard Sala, but also like just like goofy Bigfoot cartooning clouds. But it looks great. Here too, look at that. But then look, every tire tread, different directions, crossing over each other. That's nuts. Nobody expects you to draw that. But Joe Sacco does. Even this is all beautiful to me. This is such a good illustration. When I first read this, when it came out, well, not the comics. There was a first edition in like the late 90s that would like split up the book into two. And I was blown away. And I think I was blown away so much by just the idea of this great journalistic comic that I didn't really notice the art. Because last night I was flabbergasted. By the way, that's the first time I've ever used that word in a sentence, flabbergasted. I don't know why that came out of my mouth. But I was just like, I totally forgot how amazing he is at drawing. Like, I was surprised. I totally did not remember being that in awe when I first read it. Because I think I was just so blown away by the story. Once again, he's in a room with some strange men. And they're all telling a story. And of course, they're drinking tea. God, yeah, it's interesting too. Joe talks about like as the book goes on, he's just getting weary of all these stories. It's almost like in his head he's kind of pissed off. He's just like, here we go, another story about her brother being shot. It's just like he can't take it. He's kind of got to build up a little defense mechanism. This one Palestinian bus driver, just to basically get back at Israel, he just drove his bus off this. He killed like 40 Israelis who were riding this bus. He just drew it off. I'm sorry, he drove it off this like a ravine down a cliff, and everyone died. A little suicide mission. More stories of abduction. Here they talk about the collaborators. A lot of the Palestinians collaborate with the Israelis. And just to show that the Palestinians aren't just these meek sheep who are turning the other cheek. Because a lot of these guys do say, like, they're like, we don't want to, we don't fight. We just hope the Israelis will come around. We really despise them, what they're doing, but they're basically pacifists. But when they find a collaborator, man, it's gnarly. They torture and kill them. That looks so different. That looks like a totally different artist. Like this could be from an old EC comic. That looks doesn't look like a Joe Sacco face. I always thought of Palestine, I thought it was warm there. It seems like it's always cold. And of course, nobody has much money. They have no central heating, most of these people. So they're always like bending over coals. Maybe they'll have a space heater if they're lucky. We meet this one sad guy, Amar. And he kind of becomes Joe's next guide. Joe talks to a lawyer, and this is weird. The lawyer starts telling him about a case, an honor killing. And, we're obviously, this book is pretty much siding with the Palestinians for the most part. But then you got to remember, some of these Muslims are like, this guy's defending it. He's like, their daughter shamed the family. What else are you going to do? They killed her. So I have to defend the family. This lawyer's in charge of defending this horrible act. I guess the daughter committed adultery and they strangled her. Because Islamic law calls for death to adulterers. Look at, that's another un-Joe Sacco face. I don't know where that's from. That is a very interesting face. Maybe a Charles Biro crime comic? I don't know. It looks great though. Sometimes the Palestinians get angry with Joe Sacco because he's American. And they know what America's done. They've given Israel all their weapons, a lot of their weapons. And we've never helped the Palestinians. So sometimes they can't help but just be like, yeah, you fucking Americans, fuck you. Look at this interesting shading here going on. Is this the one? I hope it's coming up. I hope I didn't miss it. Whatever. Hopefully it's coming up and I'll point it out. And this guy's defending Hamas. And don't forget, this is all 1991, 92, when Joe was there. So this is way before all the stuff in the past, few years. I love these guys, these creepy guys in full camo. They're like ninjas. Another just remarkable drawing. Once again, all the tire treads in the mud. This one's called Black Coffee. Like I said, so Amar is his new guide. Amar's taking him around talking to old people. More people who were actually around in 1948 who remember when Israel became a state and the Palestinians lost their land. The Palestinians call it the catastrophe. And supposedly the English are supposed to be impartial. So the Palestinians would go to the English and be like, oh, all these Zionists have guns. Please give us some guns to defend ourselves. And they might give them like 4 rifles for like a whole village. So obviously the British, were betting on one pony. And they really didn't care about the Palestinians. Sorry, guys, I can't get over this. That is just so R. Crumb great. The way R. Crumb just is so good at drawing buildings now. I mean, in his later years, when he moved to France. Talking about the curfew. Yeah, so all Palestinians in these regions have to be home by like 8 or 9 o'clock. Oh, guys, I hate to beat a dead horse. Look at this. That is so fucking beautiful. Poor Amar, he's always sad. Basically, Amar's he's not just sad because of the Israeli thing. He's got no job. He lives in a place with a dirt floor. He doesn't even have a proper toilet. He just wants, middle class stuff. He just wants to be able to work. But as we talked about, it's so sad. Like, not only they're like uprooting all these Palestinians, jailing them, killing them, but they even like make it harder for their businesses to compete. They like make it really hard. Like, let's say you're a gardener, like this guy, for example. He grows these tomatoes. Like I said before, he's told me, like, Joe, here, take these tomatoes. Come on, look how good they are. And Joe's like, I'm good. So he talks about all the rules. Like, if he wants to ship tomatoes to, like, definitely out of country even, or even just across the wall into Jerusalem, he's, like, slapped with all these fines and taxes and tariffs. So he can't compete with an Israeli. The settlers are not. In fact, the settlers get kickbacks. It's almost like because you're settling this dangerous area, you're going to get tax write-offs. So it's just like, not only they're just completely fucking the Palestinians in any way they can. Front, back, top, bottom, they're getting fucked. He even starts putting his tomatoes in boxes that say, made in Israel, not made in Palestine. Because if, let's say he was going to ship these to France, the Israeli guys at the airport will let them sit and rot and send all the Israeli tomatoes ahead of it. He finally meets guys who are kind of upper middle class for Palestinian standards. They actually have a house, just a real house, not leaking tin roofs and stuff. So these guys are doing okay, but of course they're not happy. Seems like no one's happy in this comic, except for the Israelis. Here's Joe Sacco being a pig again. I've never been a mousy guest. Look at this crazy way to draw mud. It almost looks like clouds. This is just gorgeous to me. This looks so good. So poor Amar insists on paying for Joe's taxi. Joe tries to protest, but it's just, they're so courteous there. Look at that. Tire tracks. I can't even remember a cartoonist who ever bothered to do that. Like going all that work to be like, oh yeah, when there's mud, that's what you see. And look how like cartoony it gets here. Joe's at a friend's, this guy Larry's house. I think he's a European. Oh no, he's a Palestinian American. And he's got a nice place, and he takes his first hot shower in like a week, and that just shows his ecstasy. Once again, showing their courtesy, there's one little space heater, and he makes Joe sit right in front of it. He's like, you must sit there. He even gives up his... Oh wait, I'm sorry, that's later on. But he spends the night reading Edward Said. Little did he know that Edward Said would do his introduction years later. Jabala. And this is just this storm is just crazy. He really captures it too. So he's got a new kind of friend named Same. Same hasn't worked in 2 years. Not that happy. But he's a professor. He's this educated guy. He's just living off the last money he earned 2 years ago when he taught in Yemen. His place is so crappy though. There's hailstones just bouncing through the roof, the cracks in the roof. So we're back in that town where that special education school is. And Same, he volunteers there. They don't even pay him. And once again, he's totally taking time out of his day to show Joe around. Anyone Joe wants to meet, he'll fix it. He'll set it up. I love the way he draws these old men. They're broken in faces. So they're viewing the devastation of the storm. So the storm is so bad that like the streets are flooded. So they have to like see if there's rocks in the street to like jump from rock to rock. I don't know why I just love that panel. The body language of him. Looks like he's dancing some weird dance, but he's just trying to walk without getting his shoes wet. Another beautiful one. So nice. So Sally, even though he lives in this hovel, he's made it pretty nice. He's a very cultured guy. He has beautiful paintings, reproductions of paintings on the wall. And he grows plants. And so Sammy insists that Joe take his bed and he sleeps on the floor. And, Joe tries to argue, but they're just, my Italian relatives are like that. You can't argue with them. You could just be like, let me pay for the meal for once. And they'll just be like, they'll get mad. Once I snuck into the restaurant and tried to pay before we were done. And the guy ratted me out. This was in, I think it was Padua. And he ran out because he knew my relative wouldn't like it. He knew we were Americans. And he came out and he basically whispered in his ear. And he was just like, no, my relative. And he paid. But I had this other relative, I tried to do that and I succeeded. And he actually got mad at me. He was really pissed. They just have this fanatical graciousness to them. Sammy even offers him his underwear, and Joe has to draw the line somewhere. He's like, Sammy, no, I'm not going to wear your underwear. So now we meet the boys. And this is still that same town with the clinic, the deaf children clinic. Basically, there's this like Israeli guard tower just watching everyone. More beautiful illustration. And of course, Joe's pumping these guys for information. And they're talking about the beginning of the Intifada from a few years earlier. And it was surprising because the Intifada was not planned by the PLO. It was a serious, spontaneous uprising where something happened and people just couldn't take it anymore. And all the kids went to the streets. And it didn't stop for years. Every day, kids with scarves around their face would be throwing rocks at soldiers. Soldiers would be shooting kids and adults. And by kids, I mean, older kids. Most of them are like, teenagers. And so finally, after all this time, we find out. This almost looks like a Kim Deitch character to me. I love this this little kid here walking against the wind. Such brilliant cartooning, such brilliant drawing. And he interviews this little kid who's 15, and he talks about basically when he was 12 or 13, basically the PLO scouted him. And I believe he's of the Popular Front faction. And basically they do this. They see kids that they see promising, and they'll be like, hey, come to this meeting. And you want to join the Popular Front? And for a year or two, they basically apprentice just by writing anti-Israeli graffiti. And then after a certain amount of time, they become full-on Popular Front members. And this kid's only 15, but he's kind of a veteran now. And he seems to, he's into it. And they talk about fighting within the PLO. You know, these groups fight amongst themselves. They disagree about how to deal with Israel. Sometimes they get in, like, turf wars. And basically, this kid every day is just a battle. Even if he's going to go to school, if he sees soldiers, he just doesn't go to school that day and starts throwing rocks at the soldiers and running away from them. Here's another example of them harassing injured patients in hospitals. Yeah, this story's crazy. This kid's shot twice. And then they yank him out of bed, even though the doctors are screaming. He's like, no, you can't do this. They throw him on the ground and they break his arm. And then when they see him clutching his arm, they start kicking him in the arm. And the doctor tries to intervene, and the nurses, and they just beat the shit out of the doctors. It's just horrible. It's like a young kid, a little teenager, you know? So more of the boys. God, man, that's a great face right there. It does look like they're less caricatured now, doesn't it? It looks like his art's becoming more realistic as the series progresses. Basically, they're interviewing, like, basically social workers, you know, people who deal with the injured, try to help them get back into society. Handicapped. And more of Sammy's problems. Still can't get a job that pays. And he's running out of his money that he made in Yemen, so Joe's worried about him. He's like, what is he going to do when that runs out? Wow, look at this. Rewind. So now Sammy's taken him to a special place. And the storm is still raging, and you know, this is a very impoverished area, so they don't have paved roads. It's almost like craters full of water. Sometimes they can't even go down the street. They just have to turn around and try to go around it. Oh God, these 2 pages, amazing. And so they run into this building, once again, some young Palestinian men, and they watch a videotape. And I guess this is amateur. It's almost like a super reel of just Palestinians fighting Israeli soldiers. And I guess there's a CBS clip that was famous where these soldiers are methodically breaking these kids' arms, just like emotionlessly. Sorry. I just love that, the shadows on the wall. Joe's worried about breaking the curfew. He's like, we should get going. Look at this interesting page. It looks like nothing else in the book. Just the deep shadows. They're walking through this town after curfew. They have to be really careful, of course. And then they watch the video again. This is It's just like, I don't know, hate porn. Look at that. This is so weird. That's the Terry Austin technique for light turning into shadow. It's almost like a little maze if you look closely at it. That's weird. I wonder if Joe Sacco's a Terry Austin fan. Pilgrimage. Oh my God. Sorry, guys. I gotta shut up about this. Look at this fucking page. Fucking beautiful. Once again, I love these. Almost like they're floating in the wind. So now he's back in Jabalia. And he's still with Sameh. Sameh's still showing him around. This one's a 2-page spread. I'll try to, I don't want to break the spine, but it's pretty nice here. And I love this. Once again, I really love these captions. Yeah, he has changed so much from the first few pages of this book. I like how you always hear Joe's thoughts, and a lot of times he's just like, ooh, that would make a good picture for the graphic novel. Because through all of this, he's just really soaking it all up just so he can make this great piece of art. So it's kind of interesting just seeing like the thought process of someone working on something this monumental, It's, 2 years he's like just thinking about this graphic novel every day, getting information, kind of organizing in his brain. They go to the grave of the first person killed in the Intifada a few years back. Meet some more old people who tell their sad stories. I've never seen an explosion look that cool in a comic in black and white. I know it's silly to it's amazing to me. It's like you see every grain of sand being kicked up. There really is a sameness to a lot of these stories, just because that's what makes it more sad. It's like, it's horrible just for one person to have to, being treated like this, but it's just thousands and thousands were treated this shabbily. He finally has some kind of nice night where he goes to a wedding. He gets invited to a wedding by Sameh. It's so weird the way these guys are dancing. It almost looks like they're being tortured or something. Like, look at the looks on their faces. Oh, I love this. Even in the background, every face is really well delineated. I know alternative comics don't work this way, like mainstream comics, but I'd love to see like a fill-in issue of a Palomar story by Joe Sacco. If Cooper Hernandez wanted a break from the monthly grind, he could draw Palomar number 418 fill-in issue. And now these people are grilling him. They're curious about America, asking him all these questions. Are there soldiers in your country carrying guns all the time everywhere? This little girl, she just thinks that's what life's like, That's what the world's like. It's raining so hard that they can't even talk to each other, hear each other over the corrugated tin roof, getting pounded. Look at him driving through this. That's not a puddle. It's a fucking pond. And basically he's running errands with Sameh and going to meet some more people to talk to. Oh, God. He's so good. Sorry this is taking so long, guys. I'm trying to rush through it. I mean, I don't want to, but just if I really did this in detail, it would be 3 hours long. We're already over the hour mark. We're actually at hour 20. I talked to this old woman. She has another tale of woe about the Intifada. I guess her son was even causing trouble, and they still rounded him up. And they beat him so bad that he died in the hospital. Oh, this is what happens. I'm sorry, I forgot this part of the story. Is because of the curfew, her son was like shot and bleeding to death, but they wouldn't let her go to the hospital because there's a curfew. So finally, like 45 hours later, he goes to the hospital, and of course it's too late, and he dies. And then the same woman, she's got a younger son, and pretty much the same exact thing happens. They don't even want him to go to school. They're like, please don't go to school. He's like, Mom, I got to. All the kids are going. I promise I won't throw rocks. But it turns out he did. And he was rounded up by the soldiers, been shot 5 times. And they wanted to take him to a better hospital, but they refused. And so her second son dies too. She's got to bury him. Poor lady. She said that, God, at the funeral of her second son, the Israeli soldiers laughed at her. She's just sitting there crying and miserable. They just laughed at her. I just can't even imagine that. And so then they have a wake for the kid, and the soldiers attack the home. They beat up the ladies. They injured her eldest son. So she's just trying to have a wake for the kid that they killed, and then they have to barge in and cause a ruckus. That's just really just shitty behavior. Once again, this woman kind of gets mad at Joe. Just like giving him a little shit. Now we got another house full of people. We get another tale of being displaced by the bulldozers and the settlers. So they go to Gaza, go back to Gaza. Well, he goes back to Gaza. And they say their farewells. And he says, you'll come back in 2 years, Joe? Joe says, maybe if I can swing it. And of course, in the car, in this taxi, the guy next to him starts talking to him. And he gets another story. So now it looks like he's back. I think he's in Jerusalem. And these women from Tel Aviv, these Israeli citizens, he's acting as their guide because he knows Jerusalem. Look at this beautiful, it's the Jaffa Gate. I think this is like thousands of years old, or at least hundreds of years old. And of course, this is pretty interesting because they get in this kind of friendly debate about, the whole conflict. These women, like the other Israelis we've seen, they're liberal. They feel it's terrible. Oh, guys, look at this. Some more of this Severin, John Severin quality line work. But then you got this woman's goofy face. Kind of looks like Hillary Clinton. And so it's a pretty interesting debate. These women totally sympathize with the Palestinians, don't like what's happening. They don't like the fact that these settlers are building these houses that don't even seem to fit with the land. They're just like condos. But when it comes down to it, they're just like, Man, we got to protect Israel. We got no choice. You know, even if we did have peace and we coexisted with them, I don't know. They might get a new mullah. We'll give them some bad ideas, and they'll start coming for us. Ay, ay, ay. The chops on this guy. So it looks like there's like little marketplaces where all the Palestinians kind of hang out, where this woman, one of them won't even go inside. You know, these, basically if you're Israeli, you got to be on your toes. There's some places you just don't go to unless you want trouble. You might get kidnapped and have your head chopped off or something. And now he's in Tel Aviv, which is, you know, it's like fucking Long Island. It's a big city. Well, not that Long Island's a big city, but it's like on the Mediterranean. It's a beautiful, you know, modern city. And Joe's all relaxed. He's like, this is nice. And he's continuing the debate with these women. So they kind of agree on lots of things, but they definitely disagree on some. And when push comes to shove, one of these Israeli women is very adamant. She's like, it's our land now. We won the land in the war. We're tired of apologizing for the occupied territories. We just want to live our lives, okay? And now he hooks up with... God damn it, I forgot his name again. He went to this guy's house. He wasn't home, but then he's just walking down the street, and he has a lucky reunion with him. He's a guy. Oh, wait. Balat. Wait, the guy from the Balata refugee camp. He doesn't say his name. And once again, gunshots. Trouble starts. And we see the soldiers running down the street. Tear gas is fired. And this guy from the refugee camp, he's just kind of distances himself from Joe. He's like, if they see me talking to you, I might be in trouble. He's hanging out with this woman, and he hears that 3 Israeli soldiers were hacked to death by probably the PLO. So the next day is in Nablus again. It looks like a normal day. The shopkeepers are selling lots of stuff. People are shopping. Hope you're noticing this, guys. I can't stop pointing it out. I'm sorry. I just can't. And the soldiers show up, and they are loaded for bear. He says they've got this look because 3 of their own were killed, and they're just pouncing on people, anyone Palestinian, just running up to shopkeepers, slapping their faces, asking them questions with total impunity. So finally they just look at one guy and just say, that's the one. And they grab him and they take him into a bank. And one of them stands guard. They're just beating the shit out of him, I guess. We see more soldiers, and they're not nearly as angry and cocky. They're fucking terrified. They're just like, oh, man. Now we see Roadblock, and he's stuck in this long roadblock. He's in another taxi trying to get somewhere. I can't remember. This baby, this crying baby. It's like Uncle Fester. Man, he really knows how to draw cars too. Once again, Joe gets to pass through the roadblock. He says, I'm the king of all fucking roadblocks. He has very good luck with roadblocks. And now Jenin, and He's talking to this old guy, this old Palestinian, who's talking about Shakespeare, talking about all the English writers that he likes. And this guy's kind of weird. It sounds like he's talking about how he thinks the Israeli leaders are great. And he's kind of dissing his own people. He's like kind of saying, these Palestinians are idiots. Once again, just some stranger comes up. The guy says, come on, tell this guy your story. And then he walks away. Now we see A Boy in the Rain. And this is interesting. He meets this kid who's I think he's an American. No, he's an Irishman. He's who's like a dabbler in religions. He's studying for the Anglican priesthood, but he does the Stations of the Cross with the Franciscans, joined the Armenian Orthodox Order for evening vespers, and so now he's at the Wailing Wall talking with the Hasidic Jews, and he's befriending all these people. It's almost like he's a religion junkie. And they're at this like big religious ceremony. Joe goes for the journalistic aspects of it, but this Irish guy just goes because it's just another religious thing he can join. This person's holding up their baby. Once again, a very funny looking baby. It looks like William Frawley from I Love Lucy, the shrunken body. And so now he's on a bus. He's finally getting out of Palestine. And he's talking to an American Jewish woman who just visited Israel and like contributed to the army, like basically volunteered to help the army out. And of course, he tries to get in a little debate with her and talk about the Palestinian side of the argument. And then he's hanging out with these young people. And I think it's this Israeli guy tells the story. He says he remembers that one day it was raining outside. And these Israeli soldiers see this little kid and they say, stand there. They make him stand outside the protective trellis here. So they're all dry under this, thing. And they make him stand just a foot away so he's getting rained on. And they're basically just humiliating him and just, asking him questions. And this Israeli says, what was he thinking? Was he thinking that one day the world would be better and I will greet these guys as neighbors? Probably not. What becomes of someone when he believes himself to have no power? And we see this little kid, and it looks like you don't need to be Nostradamus to think that, a kid's probably going to grow up to throw rocks at Israeli soldiers and hate them. And so I guess he has one more. He's trying to get out of there, and the bus driver gets lost and takes him into like the Gaza Strip. And of course, he's terrified. He's like, the wrong directions. And he, turns around. At least we get just another beautiful drawing here. And then it's weird. I don't know if a page of my book fell out. I don't think it did. This is so odd, the way it ends. So we see this driver, really nervously, turning the wheel, trying to turn the bus around so he can hightail it out of there. And then the last panel, it says, he stopped at a small army post and asked for more directions. And that's the end. Because, here's about the author and other books by Joe Sacco. So it's very weird. I don't know if something happened in my book or something, if this is a misprint, because that is really just not an ending at all. So there you go, guys. Sorry it was so long, but what can you do? Look at this fucking monster. That's fat. But I hope you enjoyed looking at it. I enjoyed the shit out of rereading this again last night. I was just enthralled. I mean, I think it was the past 2 nights. I've been, it's a lot of reading. But if you don't have this already or have read it, it's probably at your local library. In fact, I guarantee it is. At least check it out from the library and read it. But if you want a serious, good comic book academy of your own, this is a must-have. This is probably in the upper echelon of some of the greatest comic art ever made, writing and drawing. This is just outstanding stuff. So I hope you guys like looking at it, and I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.